All right, let's dive into a fascinating area where AI meets neuroscience. We're going to be talking about ConTraNet. It's this really cool new hybrid model that's changing how we understand signals from the brain and muscles.
Yeah, it's combining those, two big AI players, the convolutional neural networks and the transformers, and it's using them to decode these complex signals, and it's doing it really well.
And get this, it can do all this with just a little bit of data, which is amazing. At least from what I saw in the research papers, it's a pretty big deal.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in areas like brain-computer interfaces or neuroprosthetics, getting a ton of data is a huge challenge, and
Mm.
ContraNet really tackles that head-on.
Okay, so before we go too deep, can we just start with like the basics? What exactly are human-machine interfaces and how do they connect to all of this?
Sure. So human-machine interfaces, or HMIs for short, basically act as this bridge between us and machines. They let us use biological signals to control things outside our bodies.
So we're talking about like controlling a robotic arm with your mind or using muscle signals to move a wheelchair.
Exactly. And the research here focuses on two main types: brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs, which use brain signals, and then electromyography-based HMIs, EMG HMIs, those rely on muscle signals.
Wow, that's incredible. But I imagine decoding those signals is like really hard. What kind of challenges do researchers run into?
Well, one of the toughest things is just how complex the signals themselves are. EEG and EMG signals are always changing. It's like trying to hit a moving target. Plus, you've got both short range and long range dependencies in there, meaning to understand the signal, you need to look at the immediate stuff, but also information that's further away.
So it's not enough to just capture the signal. You have to understand the whole language of the brain and muscles.
Precisely. And that's where some of those traditional methods, like your convolutional neural networks or CNNs, start to struggle. They're great at finding those local patterns, but they kind of miss the forest for the trees when it comes to long range dependencies.
Yeah, it's like trying to understand a whole sentence by just focusing on each individual word. You lose all the context and the real meaning.
Perfect analogy. And that's where ContraNet comes in with its unique hybrid approach. It's taking the strengths of CNNs and combining them with the power of transformers. They're a type of neural network that's really good at figuring out those relationships that unfold over time.
It's like ContraNet has this magnifying glass for the details and then a wide lens for the big picture all at the same time. So can you break down exactly how this hybrid design works?
Well, ContraNet basically has two main blocks: a CNN block and a transformer block. The CNN block is like your feature extractor. It learns those local dependencies, picks out important patterns from the signal. Then the transformer block takes over. It analyzes those features in relation to the whole signal, capturing those crucial long-range dependencies.
Sounds pretty powerful. How do we actually know that it works, though? Like, what kind of research has been done to test ContraNet?
Well, the researchers really put it through its paces. They used four publicly available data sets. Two of them focus on brain signals, specifically EEG data from what they call motor imagery tasks.
Motor imagery, is that like imagining you're moving?
Exactly. So the people in these studies were asked to imagine moving their hands or feet while their brain activity was being recorded.
So ContraNet's job was to decode those imagined movements from the brain signals, right?
Yes, exactly. And then they also had two other data sets that contained electromyography or EMG signals. Those capture muscle activity, which gives you another angle. So you've got a really diverse set of data to see what ContraNet can do.
Yeah, so they really wanted to see how it handled different kinds of signals and tasks.
Exactly. And one of the coolest experiments they did focused on how ContraNet actually extracts information from these signals. They use these things called attention maps to visualize the process.
Attention maps, what are those?
Think of it like a heat map on top of the signal. The brighter the color, the more attention ContraNet is giving to that particular part of the signal. So you can see which parts of the signal it's using to decode the information.
Yeah, you're basically peeking inside the AI's mind to see how it's thinking.
In a way, yeah. And in one test, using EEG data, it was really clear that ContraNet focused on the relevant parts of the brain signal and ignored the irrelevant stuff.
So like it's learning to filter out all the noise and just zero in on what really matters.
Exactly. And they saw this across multiple data sets. So whether it's brain or muscle signals, ContraNet's really good at picking out the important information.
This is all really impressive. But can ContraNet actually use this information to classify different movements or intentions like accurately?
That's the million-dollar question, and that's exactly what the researchers wanted to figure out next. They wanted to see how well ContraNet could tell the difference between, say, different types of motor imagery, hand gestures, and even more complex movements.
So how did it do? Did it live up to the hype?
It really did. ContraNet's performance was, well, remarkable. Across all the datasets and tasks, it just consistently beat out other state-of-the-art methods. It was getting higher accuracy in classifying movements and intentions every time.
Okay, but can you give us some actual examples? How did it actually stack up against the competition?
Sure, let's take the BCI Competition 4V dataset as an example. The task there was to classify left and right hand motor imagery, figuring out if someone was imagining moving their left or right hand. And ContraNet, using something called cross-validation, which is a really robust testing method, it got an average accuracy of 76.57%.
So they really made sure the results weren't just by chance, right? And how did the other methods do by comparison?
Well, on that same task, some pretty established algorithms like EGNet and DeepConvNet, they got accuracies of 74.18% and 73.63%. So yeah, a noticeable difference there.
Yeah, definitely. But you were talking earlier about ContraNet being really good at working with limited data, right? Did they test that too?
Oh yeah, they definitely wanted to see how it performed when you only had a small chunk of the data for training. That's super important because, in the real world, getting those huge data sets can be really hard.
So they were basically trying to make things harder for ContraNet to see how it would adapt.
Exactly. And honestly, that's where ContraNet really shines. Even with just 10% of the data from one of the EEG datasets, it was able to reach an accuracy of 79.26% on a two-class motor imagery task.
Wow, that's really impressive. Limited data isn't even a problem. What about the muscle signal datasets? Did it do well there too?
Yeah, for sure. On one dataset with 10 different hand gestures, ContraNet got an average accuracy of 77.15%. And again, way better than other methods. So it's really consistent across brain and muscle signals, which just shows how powerful this hybrid approach is.
It's definitely clear that ContraNet is great at decoding those signals and figuring out what movements are happening. But what about real-time applications, Can it process information fast enough to actually do something like control a prosthetic limb in real time?
This is a really good question. To answer that, they looked at how ContraNet performed in what's called online decoding. Basically, the model has to classify the signals as they're being recorded in real time. It's a much tougher challenge because it can't look at the whole data set at once.
So it's like the AI has to think on its feet, make decisions as the information's coming in.
Exactly. And for this evaluation, they actually used a more complex version of ContraNet just to make sure it was a fair comparison with other big deep learning models.
They kind of gave ContraNet an upgrade to compete with the best of the best. So how did it do?
ContraNet still came out on top. It got an average accuracy of 96.16% for online decoding of hand gestures. It even beat out ResNet 50, which is a really well-established model, and was even pre-trained on this massive image data set.
Wow, it's like ContraNet is built for speed and accuracy, so it definitely seems ready for those real-time applications. But I'm curious, we've been talking about ContraNet as a whole, but what about the individual parts, the CNN and the transformer blocks? What does each one actually bring to the table?
Well, to figure that out, they did an experiment where they took out one block at a time and saw how it affected the performance. And when they removed the CNN block, the accuracy dropped, a lot. So that really highlights how important the CNN is for picking out those local features and making the learning process efficient, especially with limited data.
So it's like the CNN does the groundwork, and then the transformer takes it from there.
Yeah.
What happened when they took out the transformer block?
It also made the performance worse, but not as much as taking out the CNN. So it seems like both blocks are important, but that transformer's ability to see those long-range dependencies is especially crucial for getting that really high accuracy.
Like a dynamic duo, each one with their own strengths. But this all sounds pretty abstract. Can you give us a more concrete example of how ContraNet actually does its magic?
Okay, imagine you're listening to the radio. ContraNet's CNN block, it's like the tuner. It focuses on specific frequency ranges within the signal, just like how you tune your radio to a particular station.
So it's blocking out all the static and zeroing in on the frequencies that actually carry the music.
Exactly. And what's really cool is that the CNN often ends up focusing on the same frequency ranges that scientists have already identified as being important for motor imagery, using those traditional methods.
So ContraNet is basically rediscovering this scientific knowledge all on its own.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It really shows how powerful deep learning is for finding patterns and making sense of these complex signals.
We've covered a lot here, from the basics of HMIs to the inner workings of ContraNet and how well it performs. Can we just step back for a second and summarize the key advantages of ContraNet? What makes it so groundbreaking?
Sure, ContraNet has a few key advantages that make it a game changer for HMIs. First, that hybrid design, it can grab both local and global features, so it understands the signals on a deeper level. Second, it's incredibly data efficient. It can achieve amazing accuracy even with very little training data.
Which is a huge deal when you think about applications where getting lots of data is just not feasible. What else makes ContraNet stand out?
Well, third, it generalizes really well to new data. It can adapt to different people or situations without needing to be retrained over and over. And finally, it's pretty compact, which makes it perfect for real-time applications. It could even potentially be used on portable devices.
So we've got accuracy, efficiency, adaptability, and potentially portability. That's a pretty impressive package. But before we get too carried away, are there any limitations to this research?
Well, it's important to remember that this research is still pretty new. One limitation is that most of the testing was done offline, meaning the model had access to the whole data set beforehand. More research is needed to really understand how ContraNet would perform in those real-time scenarios where it has to process everything on the fly.
Yeah, so the real-time decoding results are promising, but we still need more evidence to be sure it can handle the real world. Are there any other limitations we should be aware of?
I think another area for future research is developing a single model that can handle both EEG and EMG signals seamlessly. Right now, you need separate ContraNet models for each type of signal, which could make things more complicated in real-world applications.
So there's definitely room for improvement in terms of making a more versatile model.
hmm
But it sounds like ContraNet has a really bright future ahead. Can you give us a sense of what those future applications might look like? Where do you see ContraNet making the biggest impact?
I think the possibilities are really exciting. One area I'm particularly interested in is assistive technologies, especially for people with mobility impairments. Just imagine if someone with paralysis could control a prosthetic limb just using their thoughts. It could give them back their independence, their mobility. It would be amazing.
That's a really powerful image. This technology could actually change people's lives for the better. Are there other areas where ContraNet could have a big impact?
Absolutely. Neurorehabilitation is another big one. Think about people recovering from strokes or brain injuries. Imagine a system that gives them real-time feedback during therapy, adjusts the exercises based on their progress and brain activity.
So it's like a personalized virtual therapist helping them every step of the way.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't stop at healthcare. ContraNet can decode complex signals, so you could use it in all sorts of fields, like analyzing financial markets to predict trends or processing environmental data to get a heads up on natural disasters.
Wow, so ContraNet could become this essential tool for understanding and responding to these really complex systems.
Exactly. The possibilities are pretty much endless. It's not just about decoding the signals. It's about using AI to enhance what humans can do and solve real problems.
I think that's a great point. So we've covered a lot in this deep dive, from the nuts and bolts of how ContraNet works to its amazing performance and all the potential applications. It's clear that this technology is really pushing the limits of what's possible. Before we wrap things up, any final thoughts for our listeners?
ContraNet is a really powerful example of how we can use AI to understand the brain and body. There's still work to do, but this research gives us a glimpse into a future where humans and machines can interact seamlessly and intuitively. It's a really exciting time to be watching this field.
I completely agree. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into ContraNet and the future of human-machine interfaces. It's been a really fascinating conversation.
It's been a pleasure talking with you. Keep exploring, stay curious. Until next time.